안녕하세요. 오늘 세미나에 이렇게 주제 발표 토론에 참여해 주신 분들
I'd like to
감사드리고요.
thank all the panelists who are here with us today. And in particular, I would like to thank Dr. Zhang Huizi, a professor at the Institute of DPRK and RK Studies at Jilin University, who is with us from China, and Zhang Ji-young, professor, the Center for Korean Studies at Fudan University, and Dr. Hirai Hisashi, research fellow at the Institute for Far Eastern Studies. Thank you very much for being with us. We have with us distinguished speakers with expertise, and I would like to thank you all for being with us. Every year, IFES wants to look at Party Congress and the Central Committee meetings, the plenary meetings, and the New Year's addresses. We take all of these different events into consideration to try to provide an outlook of North Korea's state of affairs. Last year, around the 8th Party Congress, we had an international symposium similar to this on January 4th. And this time around, as you know, there's a 4th plenary of the 8th Party Central Committee, which is going to be held for 5 days up until December 31st. And now that we are entering the dawn of a new year, we're going to look past over this review of what happened in the past year in North Korea and try to take a look at this and provide us with an outlook for the new year. As you know, after the 4 nights, 5-day long meeting, there were intensive discussions that were had. There are many different items that we have to consider. The details have not been reported to the press. However, we know that there was a Rodong Shinmun report of about 18,000 characters on the results and outcome of the 8th plenary meeting. And I believe that this is going to provide a lot of insight to experts. Kim Jong-un's speech and the proceedings of the meetings have not been made publicly available. The subcommittee meetings have also not been made publicly available. There was a report that there was a subcommittee on South Korea, but we don't have any information regarding this. And it wants to look at the past 10 years of Kim Jong-un. We many thought that they might also provide with an outlook of the next 10 years. However, there was not much mention of that either. With the sanctions and COVID-19, we understand that the DPRK is going through many difficulties. They have a lot of challenges that they must overcome. Many people were looking to any foreign policy outcast coming from this plenary meeting, but that was also not provided. We understand that this 8th plenary focused on the economy, and it was very restrained in terms of talking about foreign policy. We believe that the DPRK was considerate of the uncertainty in the international climate. They're being very careful, especially given in light of COVID-19 and other different external situations. Therefore, they were very reserved in expressing a clear position. When it comes to nuclear weapons, for instance, there was no mention whatsoever, and there was just some mention in principle regarding military capabilities. Yesterday, there was another missile launch. And as for the direction forward for the DPRK, we have to look into various different items and provide with a clear analysis. When it comes to rural economy and agriculture reform, we understand that the plenary really emphasized those areas, particularly with food production. And if we take a look at the morning news, we saw that DPRK would not be attending the Beijing Olympics. They received a letter to that extent. Today, we will be talking about the DPRK economy, politics, military, international, inter-Korean. But as you know, these different sectors are all interrelated. So I believe that we will have a very comprehensive discussion. And that is how we will also manage our discussion so that we can have a clear diagnosis of this situation that has presented itself to us today. We will begin with the presentations on politics, the military, and economy. They will make up session 1. We'll take 10-minute break and move into the second session on international and inter-Korean areas. We have many panelists with us today, so I would like to really remind you that you have to stick to the time limit so that we can end on schedule. For politics, we have Kim Kap-Sik, Senior Research Fellow at KINU, with discussions by Lee Ki-Dong of INSS and Hirai Hisashi from IFES at Kyungnam University. Now we'd like to give 15 minutes to Dr. Kim Kap-Sik for your presentation. Please keep to the main points of your discussion. And for the discussants, I'll give you 7 minutes. Please do not go beyond 8 minutes. And keep your comments restricted to the contents of the presentation. If you have any other comments that you would like to make that is outside the scope of the presentation, you can do so. I think that this can give us a clear picture on DPRK politics. So now hear from Dr. Kim.
Hello, this is Kim Kap-Sik from the Korea Institute for National Unification. Do you all hear me? Yes, all right. Now, the press release from the fourth plenary of the 8th Central Committee. Now, of course, it's still only about 10% of the total press release, meaning that the mention of the South Korea policy is not much. And also, now they have had the New Year's message from Kim Jong-un, so I'd like to give you a review of the political state in North Korea. Now, North Korea called the year 2021 a year of great triumph. Of course, the year 2021 was the worst in challenges since the nation's founding, but now as the grounds for calling it the Great Triumph, now they cited the dedication to people, the monolithic leadership under the party, groundbreaking for 10,000 houses in Pyongyang and the terraced house at the Potomac Riverside and so forth. But they were not able to present the specific economic achievements, and that is probably in consideration of the political meaning, in other words, the 10th anniversary of Kim Jong-un's leadership. Now, in 2022, it is likely that the policy is to be maintained. Now, at the same time, it will focus on domestic governance, for example, for health and economy, and then maintain a wait-and-see mode on foreign affairs. Then now, for the 2022 perception on the situation, I believe in North Korea is quite negative because it itself has said that through this plenary, we will be made aware of the strategic importance of next year's projects while facing heavy and responsible dilemmas. So it seems as if North Korea will focus on the emergency health control and focus on livelihood. As you can see that it has set the socialist agriculture as a standalone agenda. In other words, they will first focus on infection control, economic recovery, then external relations activities will follow. Now, what I call so I cited the heavy and responsible dilemma that North Korea has called it, and this is probably the economic challenges inside North Korea because of the restrictions in the movement because of the COVID pandemic. And so as they try to recover their economic activities, how they're going to also ensure livelihood to the people. So I believe that that is the important issue for them. And then now, of course, for the situation on the Korean Peninsula, now North Korea appears to maintain the closure of the activities for now. And then now, regarding the possible changes in North Korea's South policy or unification strategy, Now, whoever is elected in Korea's presidential election next time, North Korea has no experience of friendly relations with the next government, so it could also broaden its room for South Korea policy. And whoever is elected, there will be probably a more strictly principled approach coming from South Korea. And then now, for the political achievements of North Korea in the 2021, what they have cited are change in the party culture is one of them. And as you can see that in the Rodong Shimun, they talked about the people first ideology or dedication to the people, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-ilism, the monolithic leadership of the party and the central committee, and unified under party's revolutionary thought. So these have been cited as some of the achievements in the political area in North Korea. So perhaps Kim Jong-un's absolute power is strengthening, befitting his status as the leader. And also the party has set out some of the statements regarding their future challenges, but they are a little different from the past, meaning that they would have to strengthen their leadership and also they would have to strengthen their leadership capability as well. And also they are focusing on how they are going to focus more on the party's economic policy and also to improving the people's economic plan. And there have been some slight changes in the Politburo through these meetings. One thing is the chair of the State Planning Commission, who is Park Jong-un, who is also the Deputy Prime Minister, and he has become a full member of the Politburo, which is the first time for a Deputy Prime Minister. So, and then also Lee Tae-seok, now the newly appointed Minister of Social Security. And they actually have changed the minister 3 times last year. So it appears as if North Korea is particularly interested in keeping house internally. Then now Lee Sang-kwon, foreign minister, now he was not mentioned, but then it is likely that he will be dropped from the Politburo. And also Kim Yo-jong, the deputy director of Publicity and Information Department. Now it appears as if she is maintaining her current position, meaning that she's not getting promoted. So then how can we read the situation are some of the questions that we need to think more about. And then based on this, some of the questions that I would like to raise. Now, I believe that North Korea is now moving on to consolidation of the party state system. So moving beyond the normalization state and moving more toward consolidation phase. So now then, in this phase of consolidation, what is playing the most important role is the party central committee. So even at the 8th Party Congress, they were able to unify the organization of the central committee. And then also they have had the 8th plenary. And what has become more clear is what is in the box. As you can see here, that they plan to present new goals of revolution and the implementation method will be defined at the plenary meeting. Now, the plenary in June was an occasion to provide an overall assessment of the first half projects, and I believe that the 4th plenary was an occasion to assess the entire year. And then they also are now emphasizing a working party. In other words, whenever they come up with policies or projects, then they are also probably thinking more about how to make them happen. And also, as was mentioned earlier, this plenary was the longest ever for 5 days. And then also there were the subcommittee meetings, which were led by some of the party officials. And Kim Jong-un, he would present the goals for the year, and then they would discuss how they're going to achieve those goals. So this is one thing that stands out in terms of modality. And then the goals would be defined, and then this would be approved at the Supreme People's Assembly. Now, under Kim Jong-il, now this didn't happen. And then now at the Politburo, they would, so under the Kim Jong-un, they used to have the review and approval at the Politburo, but now this time it was at the plenary. So in other words, the state budget was approved at the plenary. So I would say that this is another change that we can see. And one more thing is that now, although this is not clear, but we can also see some changes in their way of propaganda. Now, one feature of this plenary is that now in the Rodong Sinmun, as one of Kim Jong-un's achievements, they talked about the full-scale development of the state and also the development of the agricultural society and so forth. So this is putting emphasis on food production, and perhaps they will be discussing more about how they can implement the North Korean version of the New Village movement. And also last year there was the State of the Nation statements by Kim Jong-un last year at the State Council, and he was trying to give more motivation to the people, to the officials. So he was trying to was a bit critical of their work, but then this time around, his message was more positive, and perhaps it is because of his 10th anniversary that he was trying to give a better message about his achievements. But then it seems as if there has been a shift in their way of propaganda, being more positive and encouraging. And another message that was released was that they are going to fundamentally change the thoughts and the working of the party, and perhaps that was the basis of that. And the question is why? Why such changes occurred? Now, perhaps because of the long-term use of the term self-reliance. So they have been browsing self-reliance for quite a long time, but then there can be a sense of fatigue. So in the media, they still talk about self-reliance, but then now from Kim Jong-un's speeches, there is rarely a mention of this self-reliance. So in a recent speech, it was mentioned only 9 times, and then also at the eighth meeting, then it was only 8 times. And then in more recent speeches, they were reduced to like 4 times and 3 times. And in the latest speech, no mention at all. And also at the latest plenary, the war of self-reliance was not mentioned at all. So perhaps the frame of sending the message has changed. So in the past, when they talked about agriculture, then it was more about increasing production. But now it's more about giving a better life to people in the rural areas. They're going to have breakthrough improvement, and there will be more benefits to be provided in terms of science, healthcare, education, and so forth. So it appears as if they are changing their messaging. So perhaps how they have to bear the difficulties remains the same, but the way they are trying to motivate the people to withstand the difficulties is changing, because what they have done so far has not been very productive, and there are also growing grievances among the people. So they are now trying to change the message. So, and also because this difficulty is not going to be short-lived. So Kim Jong-un himself has mentioned this, but perhaps they're now saying, perhaps now thinking that they also have to look at it from a more longer term perspective. So from a more defensive tone, now they're changing more to a more active tone. And then a few years back, now when Kim Jong-un, they have actually had a history of the changing tone in the messaging under the Kim Jong-il era as well. So perhaps that is also what we are seeing under Kim Jong-un too. And another change that we see from North Korea is the isomorphism toward China. And of course, that is in one and understandable. For example, they might be trying to follow the Xi Jinping's example, but also the political system of North Korea might be following the example of China. So isomorphism is how the organisms in a similar environment would become similar to other organisms in the same environment. So likewise, perhaps this is something that we are seeing in North Korea as well. Now, the isomorphism, there are different approaches, coercive isomorphism or normative as well as mimetic. And I believe that these different types of isomorphism are also being witnessed in North Korea. And also at the 8th Party Congress, they have also specified the Party Congress interval to be 5 years. And another feature is that Kim Jong-un has been giving personal New Year's messages on January 1st, but he did not do it this time. Now, usually in China, what they do is Xi Jinping would give his New Year's message on 1st of every year, and then other messaging would follow, and it appears as if North Korea is following suit. So in other words, the past 3 years, Kim Jong-un's personal New Year's message was not there, and perhaps this is going to be the norm. So there would be the plenary meeting in November, then also the Supreme People's Assembly. Usually, the Supreme People's Assembly was held in April, and this is also where they decided on the state budget. But then now we can see that it is being held earlier. So last year it was held in January. This year it's scheduled for February. So this is also similar to the timing of China. And another change that we're seeing is the strengthening role of the standing committee members in the Politburo. And perhaps that is because of the increasing workload for Kim Jong-un. But still, we can also see that perhaps each is now trying to play to its role and responsibility more, specialization. And then the Politburo Standing Committee members have also led some of the work and the discussion recently. And perhaps I could also put forth a careful assessment that maybe this is also following the example of what's called the central leading small groups in China. And also we see Kim Jong-un's revolutionary thought is also taking shape. Now, of course, North Korea's governing ideology is the Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-ilism. And when we look at the hierarchy of thoughts under China, that there is the ism and thought and theory. So, for example, Marxism or Leninism, and then the thoughts would be like Mao Zedong thoughts or the Xi Jinping thoughts. And then, so perhaps they are also following this type of hierarchy, meaning that they have the Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-ilism, and then Kim Jong-un's thoughts. Now then, what would be the political implications of North Korea's isomorphism to China? And that probably could mean, on a positive note, that this could reduce the uncertainty regarding North Korean regime. But then, on a more negative note, perhaps this can also increase the tension between North Korea's sense of autonomy and subjugation. And now, recently, the former German ambassador to North Korea, Thomas Schaefer, has said that Kim Jong-un is not an absolute autocrat, that he is simply a part of the system called North Korea. And also, there are some similar thoughts as well. So then in terms of this power struggle or the tension between the conservative or the reforms factors, then if there is such tension still remaining, then when they try to re-engage with the US at a future date, then perhaps the conditions for coming to the table at that time could become even more stringent. So thank you very much for that. Well, thank you. Now I see that it has taken a bit longer than scheduled, so I would like to ask for everyone to be punctual. Now, yes, Dr. Kim has talked about how at the North Korean plenary, now they are focusing more on the economic policy and implementation of the policies. So it seems as if now they are consolidating the party organization and function. And then also their propaganda method appears to have changed. And he cited the example of self-reliance. In terms of the outlook, he said that North Korea will first focus on the pandemic control and economic recovery, then will turn its attention toward external relations. Then also in terms of the South Korea and the US policy, there are a couple of elections that they have to wait and see. So the March presidential election in Korea and so forth. And afterwards, they would be able to finalize their policy. And then, especially in the first half of 2022, the situation inside and outside of North Korea are not going to be not going to be very favorable. And then now in the first half of North Korea, they will probably maintain their existing stance, which is to withdraw the hostile policy as well as the double standards. And then now I would like to ask the discussant to provide their discussion.
아, 안녕하십니까 이기동입니다.
Hello, this is
김가시
Ki-Dong.
박사님 발표 잘 들었고요.
I enjoyed Kim Kap-Sik's presentation. He is a DPRK expert renowned in his field, so I don't have any
논의를 들어가기 전에
ideas to the contrary. But before I go in, I would like to check some facts, if I may.
박정근이 이번에 그 정치국 위원이
Said Park Jung-gun became a delegate of the Politburo this time around,
정치국 위원이 된 것은 처음이라고 말씀하셨는데
that this was the first time
부총리경 국가
for a vice secretary to do so, but I think that No did that first in 2016 at the 7th plenary, if I am not mistaken. So we have to take a look at that. And the next thing is when we, the foreign minister, he said that there is a possibility that he will not be made a delegate to the Politburo, but it has actually been confirmed because if we take a look at the plenary, if you are a Politburo delegate, you have to be sitting in the raised rows, but he was sitting towards the bottom. And even at the Defense Expo, where the Politburo delegates should be sitting, he was not there among them. And in fact, he was sitting in a different row. So we have to understand that first. I'm going to go into my discussion point. If we look past 2021 for DPRK, we were able to see that Kim Jong-un has been focusing on solidifying its institutional leadership and personality leadership. He's trying to strengthen its party leadership and control of the army. It's a revolutionary party and military front that they wanted to pursue. They moved away from the Politburo central kind of control to the Secretariat centered control, which is more conducive to the DPRK for its control. And they newly installed the first secretary office, this position. They try to have a foundation in place to strengthen the authority of the secretaries. And we were able to see that the military elites took a step backward while the economic elites took a leap forward. The personality side, we were able to see that Kim Jong-un was trying to set himself apart from his forefathers, from his father and his grandfather. For example, at the party congress, they remove the portraits of his father. And in the amended party bylaws that we were able to see from the 8th plenary, we were able to see that Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il's accomplishments have been minimized in the foreword to the party bylaws. Last year, we heard many instances where Kim Jong-un referred to his father as a father. And there was also strong mentions of Kim Jong-unism. Of course, there was no official mention of Kim Jong-unism yet, but we're able to hear that there were some mention of Kim Jong-unism. This allows us to see that Kim Jong-un is trying to lead the regime into Kim Jong-unism and move away from just inheriting the legacy of his father and his grandfather. The second point that I want to make is that the first year of the 5-year National Economic Development Plan, more than any other, Kim Jong-un focused on and emphasized collectivism. By emphasizing collectivism, the state wanted to enhance the levels of patriotism of the people. In implementing the 5-year National Economic Development Plan, it appears that the party's commands were not completely passed on to the lower levels. So the party had lost some of its control, which is why the regime wanted to exert more of a control through this idea of collectivism. And this collectivism will have two kinds of characteristics. Looking at it vertically, the people will be made to put national interests first, not necessarily the interests of themselves. And this was something that was proclaimed widely. And horizontally speaking, under this collectivism, the people would be made to help one another. These two are the values behind this collectivism that the regime wanted to pass on to all the levels of the party and of the state. The third point that I want to make is that we were able to see a stronger politicization of the economy, that the economic plan was legislated, that it became a legal act. And for those people who were not able to accomplish these economic plans and the objectives, then they would be politically punished. If you look at Rodong Shinmun, they said something to the effect that those who have not been able to fulfill the economic plan has no value even after death, that he does not even deserve to die. We believe, however, that this could bring more political pressure on Kim Jong-un himself by emphasizing how important it is to achieve these economic outcomes. The last point is that there was more of a stronger mechanism for control of the officers and of the people. In the party central committee, there were new bureaus set up to try to enhance the surveillance of the party, enhance surveillance of the military, and there is also a kind of a justice legal ministry that was newly installed to try to enhance the level of surveillance for the party elites, to try to make sure that the state can respond well to the COVID-19 outbreak and really engage in all-out breakthrough. If we were to look at what's going to happen this year, when we look at the fourth plenary, we have to bear in mind that we will only see the reported articles, so we were not able to see the full statement. So instead of rushing to conclusions saying that there were some words or phrases that have been excluded, I think we have to look at the words and phrases that have been newly introduced, one of which is the Korean word 개변, which is a step beyond improvement. It is actually stronger than that. It is closer to the meaning of innovation or reform. I think that this is a North Korean word that is closer to the word of reform. And if we look at the fourth plenary statement, the reported statement, we're able to see that there were 4 mentions of 개변, 4 mentions of reform, where they say that instead of just increasing food production or cereal production, for example, they want to try to reform the structure of cereal production. So as you can see, it's a step farther than that. And through the outcome documents, we're able to see that there is more signs that the party is going to strengthen its leadership over the economy. At the party central committee, the plenary, they placed the budget plan on the agenda and they deliberated on this, as we can presume. This leads us to believe that maybe there might be a revival of the Bureau of Planned Finance. Maybe there could be additional funding for the party central committee. And as I mentioned before, this year, DPRK is going to continue to stress collectivism because this is the only discourse that they can use to try to tie in the state together with the people. Under collectivism, they can pursue both tracks, both the revival of the state and welfare of the people. This is a very practical kind of discourse for the state. And so that is why I feel that this year, DPRK is going to continue to call for collectivism, or they might call for a new kind of discourse. But for that, we will have to keep an eye out for. Dr. Kim Kap-Sik said that there is a decreased mention. There could be decreased emphasis on self-reliance and self-sufficiency. I actually think that we might see a maintenance of that front. But maybe as a sub-discourse, that DPRK might also emphasize the spirit of the 50s or the Charlema spirit of the past. Then there is a possibility that an elite structure on the precision or sophistication of the strategic group could occur, or a checks and balances kind of situation. Typically, when the strategic groups are formed early on in the regime, the strategic groups continue to work to amass more power, and then they will try to expand on this power. And now, because Kim Jong-un is entering into his new 10 years, and he has seen some level of solidification of his regime and his rule over the past 10 years, I believe that he is going to make his strategic group a little bit more precise and more sophisticated. Also, I believe that he will make use of the elite structure that is based on checks and balances. This kind of elite structure is something that can tie in with what we saw last year with Kim Jong-un's emphasis on trying to put people first. So last year, we saw that the secretary for the organization guidance and the director of organization guidance were separated. There were separate positions. Well, there was a separation between this politics and military. We can expect to see this continue to play out in the future to try to have a sort of checks and balances between the Politburo and the military going forward. And lastly, we are expected to see continued a strong control over the military. Perhaps they can try to professionalize the organization of the military, maybe to have a strict division of power between the military command and the Politburo, and it will continue to maintain its stance that we've seen in the past regarding economic control. Well, we're going to see that the state is going to continue to be wary of how the military is growing its expertise and influence on certain sectors. And it's also going to exert more institutional control over the military leadership and also engage in more human resources. So the hiring and firing of the military elites, that is all. Thank you. Dr. Kim Kap-Sik gave an overview of North Korean politics over the past year, and Dr. Lee Ki-Dong mentioned how the organization would play out and how the discourse would also play out in the future. He provided us with more of a detailed analysis and gave us a micro view into the politics of the DPRK. Talked about collectivism and the politicization of the economy, many different changes in the phenomenon and changes in the organization. And how these new agendas items have been introduced, as we were able to see in the plenary. This is something that we'll have to continue to track.
All right, thank you very much. And now we have Mr. Hirai, who will also give us his assessment of the plenary and also his analysis. Yes, hello, I am Hirai Hisashi. I'm currently a research fellow at IFES. Now, Dr. Kap-Sik's presentation, as always, was a learning session for me. But now I would like to raise a few questions and also a couple of issues as well. First, about the plenary. Now, for myself, what I have felt overall was a sense of disappointment. Now, as Mr. Lee just mentioned, now after the 10-year review, I was also expecting that there would be a 10-year outlook, but there was none. So there was the review of last year and only the outlook for this year. So because of that, now also from the Rodong Shinmun and also in other media, they did report on the review, but then I'm not sure whether that is what they're going to follow. For example, in April, there was actually no mention of Kim Il Sung's 110th year anniversary or the 80th anniversary. So usually, if they had such mention, then perhaps they would have also had the 10-year review as well as the next 10-year outlook. And then also last year's assessment was that it was a year of a great triumph, but then in reality, I believe that they also suffered quite a lot of challenges, and this was also reflected by their own words that they were faced with heavy and responsible dilemmas. And then also the media talked about how the plenary went through the shortfalls and the lessons learned, but then they didn't specify them. And then there was also an assessment of the agricultural improvement, and which would then lead to improvement in the food supply, which appears to be. So paradoxically, this also has revealed that North Korea is suffering from a food shortage problem. And then again, yes, the word 자력 갱생, the self-reliance, did not appear at all. So of course, similar meanings were there, like similar wordings were there, like for example, living on our own or based on our own capability, but still they did not use the word 자력 갱생 or self-reliance itself. So perhaps it is due to a sense of fatigue on the word, or are they looking for a new path? Or so I wonder whether you believe that there is a slight change in their future policy. And then, right, so there was no mention of the South policy or the foreign policy. But then now I would like to mention this as a non-Korean. Perhaps it's difficult for the Koreans to mention this. So I believe that actually for this Korean government to focus on the end of war declaration is probably inefficient. So I mean, it is necessary, but then the timing might be different, because for North Korea, what they appear to be focusing on right now is pandemic control and agricultural development. So maybe they can be the areas of cooperation between the two Koreas, especially COVID-19. Now it appears that North Korea is really going all out to fight the pandemic. And This is tantamount to having self-imposed sanctions, self-imposed economic sanctions. So this also shows us that trying to change North Korea simply with economic sanctions is not going to work. So once North Korea overcomes COVID-19, then it will be able to maintain the current regime. And now regarding the personnel issues, I mostly agree with your assessment, but then now one question is the name Park Tae-sung. Now this name appeared in the Central Committee, Park Tae-sung. So until last year, the name was not mentioned, but now we see the name. So do you believe that he has been revived? And also the revision of the party bylaws. Now, it was usually it would be changed at the conference of the Workers' Party. But I believe that the revision of the party bylaws being done at the plenary is the first time under Kim Jong-un. So which of the bylaws do you believe have been revised? And the reason why I ask is, well, in the past few years, what has been consistent was strengthening of Kim Jong-un's power over his one and only leadership. And so I wonder, so for example, the party building or the party activities and then also normalization and so forth. So then perhaps they have removed the position of the party first secretary, perhaps in order to prop up Kim Jong-un's position. I wonder, so what was the specific revision to the bylaw? And then Kim Jong-un's ideology. Now, this is actually one topic that I'm thinking of for my paper. But when we go through the recent press releases, then there has been no mention of Kim Jong-unism yet. But what they do mention, as was mentioned earlier, is literally Comrade Kim Jong-un's revolutionary thoughts. And then also they even said that the whole party and the whole society have to unify under Comrade Kim Jong-un's revolutionary thought. And also, at this plenary, they talked about how they should unify under the party center's revolutionary thought. So then what Dr. Kim Kap-Sik has mentioned earlier about perhaps they are also, maybe this is an influence of China. So for example, the difference between like ism or thought. Rather than that, I believe that North Korea is more likely to move ahead in its own direction. So in the past, now they had like a Chuche ideology or whatever, but then now perhaps it would be difficult for them to move away from this type of ideology. And what is interesting is that the Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-un, Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-ilism is followed by Kim Jong-un revolutionary thought. So if they are to call this Kim Jong-unism, then this might give the impression of having clashes between Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-ilism, and Kim Jong-unism. So perhaps in order to avoid this sense of clash, they are simply calling this revolutionary thought. And also in the commemoration speech, then it also has the parallel mention of Kim Il-sung revolutionary thought, Kim Jong-il revolutionary thought, and Kim Jong-un revolutionary thought. And then also at the plenary, when they say that we should all unify under the party center's revolutionary thought, again, it lists the Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and Kim Jong-un's revolutionary thoughts in parallel. So perhaps that is what is going to be highlighted in the future. So not ism, but this type of Kim Jong-un revolutionary thought. And then perhaps what they are doing is the preparation to make that possible. And then last is about the German ambassador and what he said. And regarding this, I would like to ask whether an absolute leader and a party state can exist in parallel. Now, and also in the end, we also had this type of meeting where I myself was the only one who argued that Kim Jong-un indeed is and has absolute power. So it was a difficult debate for me, but I do believe that party state and absolute power leader can exist at the same time. So I believe what they are doing now is allocating responsibilities, but not distributing power. In other words, he is allocating responsibilities in order to lessen responsibility on himself, but I see that he is trying to concentrate power on himself. And actually, the pace of that is happening at a much faster pace than we had expected. So then thinking about the next party congress 4 years later, then perhaps the theoretic work is also being done at a much faster pace than we had expected. So that is all from me. Okay, thank you very much. So I see that there were 6 questions from Dr. Hirai. So based on these questions, we can have a separate seminar. Some are simple, but some are more fundamental questions, I believe. So of course, today, since we are having a political discussion, then perhaps Dr. Kim Gap-Soo can touch upon them. So for example, the ideology or the revolutionary thoughts, I believe that these issues merit further discussion, so perhaps they cannot be answered in full today. And also Dr. Lee Ki-Dong, I'm sure that he would also have more to say. So then now the first question was that, now at this plenary, now there was, what was expected was a review of Kim Jong-un's 10 years. Now without that, then the Kim Il-sung's 110th birthday and the Kim Jong-un's 80th birthday. So the events are going to be quite large. So in April, that's the 110th birthday of Kim Il-sung. And then also when that is also when Kim Jong-un first inherited power. So will the April event be the occasion to get an assessment of the past 10 years? And then also, will there be presentation of the North Korea's policies toward the outside? So that is the first question. And second is, this was mentioned several times by the other speakers as well, but then now the 자력갱생 or the self-reliance. So far it was North Korea's stance was to have a breakthrough utilizing self-reliance, 자력갱생. So this had been a very important concept for them, but then now, more recently, we are seeing less use of that. So does this denote a change in their direction, or what is the reason for not hearing this concept anymore? And the third question was about agricultural cooperation. So together with COVID-19 response, South Korea can think more seriously about having agricultural cooperation with North Korea. Then also at the Party Central Committee, there is a name, Park Tae-sun. So does this mean that he has been reinstated? And the fourth question is, the party bylaws have changed. So which provisions have been revised? So perhaps the role of the first secretary has been removed. So that was another question. And then last question was about the revolutionary thoughts. So in comparison to the Kim Il-sung-ism or the Kim Jong-il-ism, And then this was also related to the question of whether Kim Jong-un is an absolute power or not. Again, the latter questions would require much more time for discussion. So if necessary, then perhaps we could have an informal, closed, small seminar with North Korea study experts. So just a thought that I had. Anyway, so I would like to ask Dr. Kim Gap-soo to respond to the questions, and then also Dr. Lee Ki-Dong, if you have anything further to add, then you could do so as well. So now I'd like to go back to Dr. Kim. All right, thank you very much to the two discussants. Now then, regarding Park Tae-sung, yes, I believe that Dr. Lee Ki-Dong will be able to respond to that. Now, first, in April, the 110th anniversary or the 80th anniversary, so is there going to be a 10-year review at that time? Now, my thinking is that now rather than for Kim Jong-un's 10th year anniversary or surrounding the party congress, like the 7th or the 8th party congress. So in other words, at a 5-year interval, North Korea usually provides a 5-year review and then the outlook. So perhaps then in April this year, to have this type of, let's say, review, I don't think that is going to be likely. So between the party congresses, so in other words, so there is the 5-year review. So that is when it is going to happen. And then next is about the self-reliance, and perhaps it could appear in some of the press releases, but again, not in the speeches. For example, not in the army founding speech either. But that does not mean that the self-reliance concept itself has gone away. Perhaps the way they pursue self-reliance has changed is my assessment, especially in June. So from the second half of last year, we are seeing some changes. So for example, the self-reliance as a strategy itself perhaps remains. But then now, at a time when they have to have a longer term perspective of this, if they keep telling people to just simply tighten their belts, then people might feel a sense of fatigue. So then they are probably opting more for a more active propaganda. Then also in the New Year's, so for example, now for their food supply, now they have also emphasized more about the rice and wheat. So I think that that is also associated with that more active stance. And also they used to be quite strict toward the officials. And then now in terms of the thought control, now they are also broadening this to the people as well, not just to the party officials. So in terms of the thought training and education, so I see that perhaps that they are also broadening this to the people as well. And then agriculture and the health policy, yes, they're very important, and especially for the COVID, a vaccine would be very important. But then also, we can think more about COVID-19 cooperation for therapeutics. And then the first secretary, I do not believe it would have been removed, but for the second secretary, then, for example, the first vice chair in the party military committee, together with the so this could also have the position of the first secretary in order to lessen the workload for the party chair. But because of that, rather than removing this at a later date when they need a successor, then it's likelier that they are going to have that heir take that position. And this time, the revision of the bylaws, now where there are some clashes with other parts of the system, so some of the bylaws that were not handled in the previous meeting, so perhaps that is what they have done. In other words, improve on some of the bylaws in order to make it more coherent with each other. And then now regarding the ism and the revolutionary thoughts, right now, perhaps Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il-ism might be mentioned that is inclusive of the revolutionary thoughts. Then the people first ideology. Now, this is also included in the party bylaws, so maybe they're going to remain focused on the people first ideology. And then now, once Kim Jong-un's power becomes more solidified, then this could develop into Kim Jong-unism or Kim Jong-un thought. And last thing, now the leader's role is one feature of the North Korean regime. So the leader's power could be absolute, but does that mean that he can just override all the others' ideas and thoughts? That is not likely. So in other words, the leader would have absolute power, but then the North Korea's governance, one of the hallmarks of the North Korean governance is that they have this type of a collective leadership. And when there are clashes between these two, then it could be a problem.
뭐 110주년하고 80주년
With the 110th anniversary and the 80th anniversary, yes, they have been omitted from this, the statement. And I don't think that that is very significant.
작년 12월
However,
12월 17일 김정일 사망 10주기를 굉장히 단촐하게 보냈거든요.
Kim Jong-il's death anniversary and commemoration of his death on December 17th was a very simple affair, and that is something that is noteworthy. I think that going forward, the different anniversaries and commemorations will not be kept as a massive scale. For Pak Tae-seok, I think that in the past, with Secretary of Publicity, and then he was the director. But now there, I think, is another Pak Tae-seok who is a different person, but with the same name, which leads to some confusion. Some people have said that maybe it's the same person. He's just been brought back, and in fact, he was not, he never left. But I think that it is, I want to say that there's more likelihood that this is a different person, but with the same name. With the delegates of the party committee, we were able to see that these delegates were expanded in number, and Pak Tae-seok's name in among the delegates were in that section of the state seat where he was probably part of the delegates of this party central committee who was with the combined enterprises unit. And then there's the revolutionary thought for the party central committee. DPRK's ruling thought to become a state philosophy, it has to go through three processes. First, it has to become a revolutionary thought, and then it has to become the party ruling ideology. And third, it has to go through a systematic process as a revolutionary ideology. Kim Jong-unism is being discussed, but it has not been officially proclaimed that it is the party's central revolutionary thought. I don't think that it has gone through a more systematic process yet to become a ruling ideology. It has to go through the systematic process to become a revolutionary ideology. I think that the process is ongoing at the moment. Well, right now, I think that we are witnessing a kind of transition period where we are going to move into official declaration of a Kim Jong-unism after there is a more systematic process. And then this Kim Jong-unism will be proclaimed as the ruling ideology of the party. Right now, people undersee it as, I think it's a kind of more of a revolutionary thought. But because people have been focusing on Kim Jong-ilism, there needs to be a transition period to go to Kim Jong-unism. I think that the first secretary position is going to be maintained. And there are two revolutionary leadership. The decisive role, I think, has not changed. But beginning 2 years ago, we've seen a change that the leader in talking about the absolute status of the leader, there's been a slight change in the nuance. The absolute status and absolute position of the ruler or the leader and the decisive role have always gone in tandem, have been hand in hand and going together, but we've seen a slight change in the nuance. This means that Kim Jong-un's position is going to continue to be reinforced internally, but at least this is not going to be externally proclaimed as much as it has been in the past. Thank you. I think that has been helpful for our discussion. And I think that has been responsive to Dr. Hirai Hisashi's question. We have so much more to talk about in politics, but we have limited time, so we'll end here. Thank you to Dr. Kim Kap-Sik, Dr. Lee Ki-Dong, and Dr. Hirai Hisashi. Now we'll move on to military. The assessment and outlook for the North Korean military. We'll hear from Professor Kim Dong-Yup of University of North Korean Studies, and then we'll hear from Ahn Kyung-Mo of Korea National Defense University and Hwang Il-do of Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Can you please restrict your comments to 15 minutes? Hello, my name is Kim Dong-Yup. Because we're going to also talk about the DPRK economy after this, when it comes to the plenary, we know that there's been a lot of emphasis on the DPRK economy, so I think that that section is going to be very important. Of course, this doesn't mean that the military area is not less important, but because much of this mention has already been done in the politics section, so of course, with military and politics, we have to see them together when it comes to the organization and the system. So I think that early on in the section, many people have already touched upon some areas that are relevant to the military. So I'm just going to skip through those areas and try to keep my remarks short. When we talk about the military, I think it's easy to just look at the issue very narrowly. In the past, it's been about nuclear weapons, but we also saw a new missile launch in the DPRK. When we look at these new missile launches, many people are focused on the missile launches, and people think of that from the framework of provocation. That's how we predict these military maneuvers. We're talking about this new missile launch, and I think that we're going to be talking more about the missile launch today as well, but in 2021, when the 8th Party Congress was held, it's been a year, and I think that of all the different developments they're about to see, one of the most interesting things was that we were about to see a move away from military, a demilitarization, if you will. Of course, this is controversial because the DPRK is continuing to talk about new weapons buildup, and it's in 2018 they said that they're going to move away from the parallel Pyeongjin fronts and going to focus on economic development. But many people say that the Pyeongjin parallel front has never actually disappeared completely. I think that the current parallel track is different from the past, the Pyeongjin policy, because in the past, the Pyeongjin policy, the parallel policy was not really parallel, done in tandem, because in the past, I think up to 2018, the military was put in the back burner while the economy was put in the back burner while the military was put first. Whereas the DPRK now, especially with 2019 and after all-out breakthrough in 2020, after the 8th Party Congress, we're able to see the DPRK really pivot to the economy, really focus on the economy, and also focusing on military. And I think that this is a true Pyeongjin in the sense of the word. I think that we are also doing the same thing here in South Korea. We're spending 54 trillion in our defense military capabilities, and this is what other countries are doing as well. So I think that when DPRK is talking about Pyeongjin parallel policy, I think it's a parallel policy 2.0, a renewed parallel policy that is truer to its name, that is different from the parallel policy in the past. This doesn't mean that they're going to shun military for the economy or vice versa. Right now, I think that DPRK is focusing more on the economy And this is because of a containment diplomacy, which is going to be discussed later on. And the other is to enhance and defense capabilities. To try to have this military buildup, DPRK is not doing this for concessions or trying to threaten the South. Of course, they might consider that to some degree, but I think that the DPRK is emphasizing military and emphasizing the economy more so as a domestic political maneuver. And this is what the approach that they're taking right now, which is why with the economy, especially with the military, a lot of it is really focused on the domestic side. The messaging is for the domestic side. Oh, one of the most characteristics, the biggest characteristics here is not just the missile launch, but after the Eighth Party Congress, the developments we were able to see is that we were able to see a move away from military first, and that the DPRK state is really going towards the true parallel policy, looking at economy and military together, and that should be the framework through which we try to view this. And if we look at the Eighth Party Congress, as you know, they brought an end, a conclusion in September of the 5-year economic plan review, and this led up directly to the Eighth Party Congress. And there were some changes with the party structure, with the positions, but with the military capabilities, they were boastful of many of the accomplishments that they had. At the Eighth Party Congress, there was a lot of mention about their achievements, and I think the most striking achievements 1 year ago were in the military space. Well, at the Seventh Party Congress outcome period or review period, there were some disappointments there, and that's why they played up the military sector to try to offset the shortcomings in the other areas. We are aware of the National Economic Development Plan, but in October at the Defense Expo, as has been mentioned there, that Defense and Science 5-year development plan has also been announced. So there is not just the 5-year economic plan, but also a 5-year defense and a science plan as well. When it comes to weapons development and armaments, I think that this is a framework that we have to look at these different developments. Last year, I think there are about 9 missile launches, if I'm not mistaken, that there were 9 missile launches of different sizes last year. And this year in January, not long ago, there was another missile launch on the part of the DPRK. After the Eighth Party Congress, these different missile launches, the launches of the missiles, typically they were done in response to something done in South Korea or done by the US. So that is why we would try to frame them in the context of a provocation, that the DPRK would beef up its military armaments in response to something done in South Korea. But I think that this kind of analysis might not be mistaken. I think that this could be a mistake that we've made on our part, because that may be what the phenomenon looks like, but we shouldn't be quick to say that there's a cause and effect kind of situation, that the DPRK is only reacting to what we are doing here in Korea or in the United States. From the defense and science perspective, I think that the DPRK is really not reacting to what we are doing, but they are actually doing it in advance, because it's nonsense to think that the DPRK is responding and reacting to what we're doing here in South Korea by hurriedly building up its military armaments and doing a missile launch right then. It's because they have the capabilities at their disposal that they were able to respond that way. If we look at the military mock-up, the weapons mock-up at the military parade in January of 2021, we're able to see that there was intense emphasis on these different weapons development and the mentions of the Eighth Party Congress, the Defense Expo that we've been talking about, all these different weapon systems there. They are not all completed, but if we take a look at the mock-up and the different missiles tests, we see that they are actually working on schedule. for a little bit more exaggerating, that we have to see the DPRK's weapon systems. We shouldn't just say that they are only doing it in a reactive fashion in response to what we are doing here in South Korea. So we have to look back on our past analyses, myself included. Recently, North Korea relaunched the missile that it launched in September. It's a hypersonic missile and it's very controversial. Since last year, the DPRK, I think that with the US situation and our presidential elections, and with all of these different developments, I think that the DPRK wanted to go their path alone. They wanted to do it their way. But I still thought that I expected that they will not have a missile launch in January and February, but I was wrong. And I have to look back over my reflections because I assumed that the DPRK was not going to have missile launches because of the Beijing Olympics. I thought that they would not do anything to engage in any provocations to upset China leading up to the Olympics, especially because the DPRK needs Chinese support. And so I thought that they would not do anything militarily speaking. However, because they were doing it a part of winter exercises, I thought that the winter exercises would continue to happen, but I thought that any testing of new tactical weapons would be postponed until after March. And that after that, they will continue to maintain their own schedule. But even my own expectations were completely destroyed because they had that missile launch in January, as you all know. We cannot tie that in with South Korean president's mention of the rail connections or anything. This is just DPRK wanted to launch the missile, so they launched the missile. We shouldn't try to interpret it in a way that we feel it's correct, because that's not how the analysis should be conducted. And I think that we have to understand that this kind of analysis might have been mistaken in the past. If the DPRK tested this a strategic weapon, a hypersonic missile, it's a very strategic weapon. They were testing this before the Beijing Olympics, before the Chinese Olympics, because this means that the Beijing Olympics is not going to be a peace Olympics. Because the US has said that they're going to do a diplomatic boycott of the Olympics, and China is accepting of that. So it appears that for the DPRK at least, they don't see that the Beijing Olympic is going to be a watershed moment for peace. And so this allows us to see that the Olympic period, that perhaps if there are any international instability there, that people can point the finger of blame in the United States. And that is why maybe China would be okay with the fact that the DPRK decided to launch the hypersonic missile anyway, leading up to the Beijing Winter Olympics, because it was the US that decided to pull out of the Olympics. And so they can kind of place the blame on the US. This is quite unfortunate, however, because in the plenary, there was no mention of any strategic or nuclear weapons, and there were no detailed publicly available any mention about South Korea policy or South Korea stance. I don't know if we can say it's publicly not available, because up to 2020 and 2021, the Party Congress, I think that at least were the US policy and South Korea policy, that DPRK was very open about their stance. They had already clearly stated their position going forward. So we know that Kim Yong-chol and other people, we think that maybe there is something secret meetings that were held within the subcommittee on South Korea policy, and maybe there's going to have secret discussions that are going to be very significant. But I don't think there's going to be a lot of change or a lot of difference between that and what Kim Jong-un has already said a year before. So this means that if there were no new details about South Korea or US policy, then perhaps this leads us to believe that maybe there was no change. And of course, we can talk about this later in the next session, but It's the same with weapons. For South Korea relations or US relations, that the DPRK is going to continue to develop its technology or weapons regardless of what happens, because they place a lot of emphasis on the technological levels, and they're going to look at the conditions, but they will continue to stick to their original schedule. There were many important weapon systems that were mentioned in the 8th Party Congress and the weapons in the military parade. Many of them have been outlined and some have already been shown off and some are still under testing. I can't show you the, I don't have a way to show you my presentation materials, but there were some weapon systems that have already been tested last year. So I think that in 2022, they're going to continue to roll out the tests for these weapon systems that they have developed. And I think that April is going to be a very important month because, as Dr. Kim Gap-Sik and the others have said, this 10th year anniversary of Kim Jong-un is not necessarily going to be a very important moment. I think that the Party Congress 5-year anniversary is going to be more important, but I think that the 110th anniversary and the 80th anniversary could be a very important anniversary. And I think that around that time frame, we're going to see a very massive parade, and that is going to show off and demonstrate the DPRK's military capabilities, maybe do a satellite launch around them, and maybe even launch an SLBM, or if not an SLBM, maybe a new submarine. I think that is going to happen around that time. And lastly, as I mentioned before, we are only focusing on what is DPRK launching this time. What are the new weapons that they're launching this time? And the DPRK is going to continue to develop new weapons, but I think with all of these different new weapons, with the long-range missiles, they have already completed many of the weapons of these new weapon systems. They're not going to end with just completing the development of the weapons. They're going to bring about some changes in their strategy or tactical maneuvers, maybe with the positioning or the deployment of the weapons, that in 2022, this year, they're going to start thinking about what are the changes that they have to roll out for these different missiles, and also tie that in with military exercises. This year, I don't think that there's going to be a lot of massive ground forces exercises because of COVID-19 and other factors, but I think that the strategic forces and firing squads, and maybe that they're going to rethink the strategic and tactical deployments of these weapon systems, and there's going to be some weapons actions here. Thank you.
예, 수고하셨습니다. 예.
Thank you very much. So that there's not going to be a big change in the military strategy or a big change regarding South Korea policy, that DPRK may be looking at deployment and management operations of these new weapon systems is something that we would have to look at. Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to Ahn Kyung-Mo at KNDA. I'll give you 7 minutes, please.
So if you could keep your time to about 7-8 minutes. Yes, hello. Thank you very much for the very informative presentation. It's been a while, and so I had expected it, but then it was much more informative than I had expected. And also, likewise for Dr. Kim Gap-Sik's presentation. Now, of course, I get to hear their voices and views in various channels, so it's quite a big pleasure to actually hear them today. So now, from a larger framework, we have to look at the overall strategy of North Korea, and also for the North Korean activities, most of them are just seen as provocations and how this approach is flawed. So I also agree with that. And based on that, I would like to mention a few issues. Now, first, again, from a big picture, yes, it is also corresponding to what was just mentioned now. But then I would say that the main question is that in about 2018, there was a attempt by North Korea for a great transition. So I believe that that itself is true. And the question is, now today, is such attempt at great transition, is it continuing? Or was it also a genuine attempt? So then I would say that the military area should also be analyzed in along the same line. So from that perspective, then one important notion is, now of course the speaker talked about the demilitarization. So I believe that that is also a very important concept. So not just Dr. Kim, but also other scholars, they are pointing to the strategic and organizational break away from the military first policy. So you're calling it demilitarization. But then now my question is, then despite the great transition or after the failure of the great transition, then do you believe that this demilitarization concept is still appropriate to that? Because the even before the great transition, I believe that the break away from the military firstism has irreversibly appeared. So I have also traced that move, and it was also published as a paper, but I can see that it was in the second half of 2017 when there was a very clear break away from the military first policy. So I believe that this has been a long drawn out and a strategically planned move. But still, now there's actually little evidence that we can find about new strategic path after the military first policy. And also, North Korea has not been very clear about whether they are still following such new strategic paths, if there are any. And then now another thing that we have to think about is that now the party was perhaps trying to strengthen its power over the military. Then also at the fourth plenary, it was also made clear that the party as a bureaucracy and also an interest party were trying to strengthen its own hold on the military. But at the same time, they're trying to strengthen national defense. So in a way, they are paradoxical attempts. But anyway, so perhaps for that, we can also see it this way. In other words, they have the concept of the general economy, which is for the people. And then there's also the special economy, which is for the entitled and the party or the military. And then they also have the informal economy. So they used to have this type of compartmentalization of the economy. But then now in the 1970s, they also have the old economy, which is based on the military. And then since Kim Jong-il in the 1990s, there's a new military economy. So this is more about the interest of the military. So I believe that these two types of military economy have to be differentiated between each other. So then the current break from the military first policy is not about weakening the military, but more about breaking the military as a interest group. So I believe that perhaps they are trying to innovate the military as more of a professional group that is under the control of the civilian government. And actually, this is a similar attempt and process that had already taken place in China. And another question is about, again, how we are going to reconcile the two different phenomenon. Now, again, the non-nuclear or the denuclearization. Now, this is also one a pursuit, but then now this had been mentioned earlier. But then now, despite that, North Korea is still trying to strengthen its military defense. So maybe you can also see it from two perspectives. First, the parallel policy was never abandoned, as some argue. Or some might say that this has come back. And now in relation to this, if we can sum this up, then under Kim Jong-un, what is being strengthened? So that is about the national defense. So they are trying to re-strengthen national defense. Then is this evidence of the lack of new strategic path that North Korea had mentioned earlier? But then now, under the Kim Jong-un era, the conventional military has continued to strengthen. So but then it does not mean the strengthening of the conventional army, like the Army, Navy, or the Air Force. But then there was this type of asymmetric strengthening on certain military weapon types or the weapon systems. For example, the strengthening of the firepower surrounding the North Korean A2AD. In other words, now when it says denuclearization as it tries to strengthen its military power, then perhaps this appears to be contradictory. But then perhaps this actually shows that their intent to denuclearize is genuine because instead of the nuclear power, they are trying to strengthen their conventional power surrounding certain weapon systems. So I wonder what your response would be to my assessment. And because of the time, I'd just like to mention a few more things. Now, regarding the North Korean weapon development and also the missile firing, for example, these are more about the a message to the state. And I also somewhat agree with that. And I believe that just seeing all the North Korean activities as provocations to the North or to the outside is problematic. But then now, in terms of the security dilemma, now strengthening your national defense, now they rarely have no implications to the outside. And also the strategic weapon development, which is also a very key and focal point for North Korea. I mean, that is also included. So on one hand, yes, on one hand, it is directed to so it is directed to the domestic audience, but also it also has to have some implications to the outside. And then also, this is related to what is the double standard theory, and perhaps this type of a double standard theory, on one hand, might show that there is a problem in seeing North Korean activities only as provocations, but then also at the same time, it is about the arms control. So if North Korea were to say that, well, because of this double standard, I mean, others are doing the same, but if they are saying that North Korea not do this, then we would still do this, then that means that it can also lead to an arms race. So that is all from my perspective. Thank you. Now then, because of the time delay, then we would move along right away. So I would like to ask Dr. Kim to respond to Dr. An's discussion. And then we will also hear from Dr. Hwang's discussion.
This is Hwang to enjoy the two the presenter and the panelists. I don't think that I have any contrary points, but I do think that I'd like to touch upon some different things. As Dr. Anna said, I think that the demilitarization expression might be a little bit too strong. I think that it's a little bit over exaggerated. So I think that if you say that it is post-military first, I think that that is more accurate, or maybe we're seeing like a reshuffling of military, or also maybe instead of focusing on traditional and conventional warfare, that there are new changes in the perspective to try to look at more strategic or tactical weapons. And this is also leading to some changes within the military leadership and also with the military structures as well. So I think that it's a little bit too far-fetched to say that we're moving to demilitarization of DPRK. The biggest thing that I want to agree with what Dr. Kim Dong-Yeop said is that I don't think that the DPRK is necessarily mindful of their weapons development with what other people want or what the external conditions say. I think that the DPRK is really just sticking to their own timetable, and we tend to over-exaggerate that they are responding to what we're doing. But I think that that is definitely true, especially with the Korean Peninsula. If they are trying to look at Korean Peninsula as a theater with the K-20 through K-24, these different kinds of strategic weaponry, that is true. But historically with ICBMs, after 2017, they have not been testing ICBMs at all. So these are retaliatory kinds of strategic weapons for the US, but it appears that they're not really testing those areas. So I think this shows us that the DPRK is making a clear-cut distinction between punishment deterrence with ICBMs, with the range for the US, and the denial deterrence of conventional warfare. So the basic kind of military capabilities that a country would need to defend itself, especially also with short-range missiles. That this is something that the DPRK is going to continue to develop regardless of what happens externally. But for the ICBMs, for the punishment deterrence, those different kinds of weapons, that I think that the DPRK is mindful of different strategy. So this leads us to think that the DPRK, as has been mentioned by many other speakers ahead of me, is that for over 50 years, the joint combined US ROC exercises have a lot of military prowess, and the DPRK wants to try to offset that military might with their own warfare defense capabilities. But they have a separate kind of interpretation for their capabilities for the US. I think that many of you would agree with me when the DPRK is talking about double standards. It's saying that they're not saying that if South Korea stops weapons builder, that they will stop as well. They're saying that because South Korea is building up its weapons, we're also going to do the same. So I think that the double standards logic is something that the DPRK is trotting out to try to justify their weapons buildup, when in fact they're going to do the weapons buildup anyway. So I think that the double standard argument is not something that the DPRK is trying to use to stop to stop the Republic of Korea from weapons buildup. That is just something that they're using as a rhetoric play to justify their own weapons buildup. In fact, with the ICBMs and punishment deterrence capabilities, they have a separate stance for those. I'm saying this because there are many different contexts that we have to be mindful of. And what has been very striking recently is that this is slightly different from what Dr. Ahn has said, but I think that the DPRK's developed regional short-range missile is not something that the DPRK has developed in response to what could happen after a possible unification or all of these different discussions of unification, that I think that it's not something that DPRK has been developing in response to possible denuclearization in the past, in the future. The DPRK has not necessarily been developing short-range missiles for a future after denuclearization. That I think that the DPRK has been trying to do that to leave behind some military assets that could offset the combined US and ROC firepower. Well, we have to better understand the distinction between this kind of two deterrence capabilities of the DPRK, so long range and short range, and punishment and denial. For the regional short-range missiles, I think that DPRK is going to continue developing that according to their schedule, as they did 2 days ago, that they're going to continue to do that without hesitation. But for ICBMs, they're going to work on other technologies such as that mass warheads or solid fuel. I think that there could be some changes on that front. And if Pyongyang were to take out their ICBMs again and start testing them again, I think that this means that Biden's reserved attitude could that the DPRK is trying to do that as a breakthrough out of Biden's current position of not really doing much, which many people are saying it's kind of like strategic patience 2.0. The double standards argument, if we were to go back to that again, I think inter-Korean arms control, we have to think of a possible discourse for that could bring about changes for the strategic position of the two. But I think that this is very far removed from what the DPRK is doing right now, because the DPRK is going to continue to develop a regional short-range missiles. They believe it to be absolutely necessary as part of conventional warfare, conventional military development. And so I don't think that they are going to stop this kind of development. So if we take a look at what is happening right now, if we were to try to use the arms control logic as an answer, an immediate answer to this, that could be a little bit of a mistake on our part. Thank you. I think that he shared largely similar points, but there were a little bit of some deviations from what the presenter has said. I would like to ask Dr. Kim to respond to what has been said. Professor Ahns questions, I think that the questions have actually been responded to by Dr. Hwang Do. So the demilitarization that I mentioned, that expression is obviously not really literally about the military. Yes, I should have been a little bit more cautious about my choice of words, but I was trying to say that we are seeing a change in the resource allocation of military assets. So we're seeing a move away from military first. So I wasn't saying that DPRK is going full demilitarization mode, but that they're moving away from military first, that they're trying to look at the economy as well. So they're trying to change around their fundamentals, and that is what I try to say. So I'm not saying that the DPRK is not going to make any military assets whatsoever. Was trying to emphasize the fact that there is a reallocation of the military assets. And I also agree with what Dr. Ahn has said, that I think Dr. Hwang Do and I have had a lot of discussions on this. So I think that this punishment deterrence and denial deterrence, we have to look at them together, and that this is something that's not necessarily there to try to protect DPRK after a denuclearization, but that this is something that they want to continue to pursue regardless of that, which means that this is kind of the tail of the scorpion, if I may, about the conventional deployment, the conventional capabilities, that the DPRK is going to kind of focus and concentrate on certain kind of military assets, such as with artillery. And this is going to be a little bit different from nuclear weapons, as has been mentioned by the other panelists. And the last thing is that I'm also concerned about how these different developments are by the DPRK is mostly focused on South Korea. Of course, they are also mindful of the international theater, but the intention and the outcome might not always be the same, regardless of the DPRK's intention. The outcome or the response by the international community could be a little bit different. So we have to be mindful of that. And if I am correct, then the DPRK should get what they wanted to have in the first place, that their intentions should play out. But that is not necessarily the case all the time. So the DPRK's actions and their intentions might lead to a different kind of unintended results. So we have to come up with some kind of analysis for that as well. So that is all. Thank you.
생각보다
Thank you very much. And there has been some delay in our schedule, and I did want to make some more comments, but then I would have to wait for another occasion. And with that, we would have to wrap up this session on the military status in North Korea. So thank you very much to the presenter and the discussants. And now we will move on to the economic area. And here we will hear from Dr. Imul-ju. And then we also have Professor Zhang Huiji from the Jilin University of China, and she will also provide the discussion. So first, I would like to go to Professor Im Chul to deliver the presentation. Yes, thank you very much for the introduction. And now I would like to explain about the North Korean economy. And so at the center of the economic development of North Korea is the 5-year development plan. So I would like to give an assessment as well as an outlook for this plan. It was last year. So the first year of the 5-year economic development plan. So they reviewed the first year outcome and also gave an outlook for the second year, which is this year. So they have also explained so I would like to explain about some of the projects and the tasks that North Korea has listed for 2022 as part of the 5-year economic development plan. Now, as was mentioned earlier, yes, at the plenary or at the party congress, the economic issues were the most important. And then they also determined the tasks and projects for the second year under the 5-year plan. And then regarding the modernization of the socialist rural society building. So they have also come up with the strategy to build a socialist agricultural society. So in other words, the party congress was about defining the projects for this year and to come up with the strategy for this socialist rural society building. But then looking back to the party congress, then we can see that Kim Jong-un unusually gave a positive assessment. And of course, he did mention that there were some shortfalls and some important lessons have been learned. So they were mentioned. In other words, there have been shortfalls and lessons learned, but still, he gave a very unusually a positive assessment. But then when we look at the content of the assessment, then most of them are about the agricultural society and the construction. And especially for the agriculture, I have been focusing on this, especially since early last year. And then regarding the achievements coming out of agriculture, now they cited the extreme climate phenomenon, and then they say that they were able to preemptively prepare against the climate phenomenon, and perhaps this had a big impact on the increase in agricultural production. So I have also gone through the content of this, and I see that yes, indeed, North Korea now has a very accurate and also very speedy weather forecast. And in order to minimize the damages, they also have diversity in the varieties. They also have made adjustments in the planting season. In other words, they have developed many of these latest agricultural methodologies and also have distributed these methodologies. And they have also developed and also modified perhaps some of the crops or the seeds that are more resilient against the climate changes. So that was probably the reason for their success. And the second area of success was construction. So for example, the second general hospital in Pyongyang, then also the 3 tourism special zones like Wonsan, Kalma, Yangdeok, then also the Samjiyon zone. So that was in 2020. So not last year, but the year before. So these were the 3 construction projects that North Korea touted. Now, last year, then, I would say that they focused on building the 3 residential areas. So for example, the Pyongyang 10,000 houses, and then also the terraced housing, then also the South Hamgyong province housing project. So these were the major construction projects that North Korea had planned, and also they are seeing this as a success. And also in the industrial achievements, now they just mention very generic industrial status. Now then, if we are to look at the assessment, look at North Korea's assessment of their achievements, then since the 8th Party Congress, North Korea has been engaging in innovative ways to promote economy. They try to improve, make a general improvement in the people's livelihood, and as as one way of that, they have also tried to improve their party activities for that. And actually, this was an important goal for the party as well, or the 5-year plan. And they also sound a bit abstract. In other words, improving livelihood or improving the economic activities. Now they sound a bit generic, and also the specific explanation for this are not included. But then I see that the overall production and construction, and also the fuel, energy, and the materials and transport, which are also necessary to increase production. So I believe that North Korea has been quite successful in improving these areas. Then also the fuel and the energy that they have imported from China. In other words, the production processes that have been reliant on Chinese fuel and energy are now, they have been shifted to more domestic produced fuel. So I believe that this also has been one effort that was made last year. And uh, in the end, so they had listed some of the achievements that were more focused on improving people's livelihood. And then another remark by Kim Jong-un that I took note of is this, and that is the way to stabilize the economy in this difficult time. And we sought out ways to sustain and develop our economy with our own capability. So of course, we also had difficulties due to COVID-19, but then it appears as if North Korea became more confident about developing its economy on its own. So North Korea has been trying to improve their economy for the past few years, and now it appears as if that they have become more confident about their own ability to do so. Then again, we see that North Korea has also been trying to improve the economy, especially for the people, because stabilizing people's sentiment is very important because other things are not really going well. So, for example, relations with the South or the US are not going well, but still, then they would have to try to stabilize people's sentiments. So, one way of doing that is to improve the economy. And then also, they even have introduced a childcare program last year. So they have highlighted them, and I would say that they have also made quite achievements last year. And also last year, they did emphasize agriculture. And where I take note of is reducing reliance on China. So I believe that this is also a deliberate move. And the basis for that is, well, statistics for last year are not out yet, so I was not able to use them. But then now looking at the 2020 data, then we see that the import of fertilizer and food now compared to that, so on a year on year basis, they went down by like over 20%. And I would imagine that last year it has gone down even further. So what this means is that even considering for COVID-19, North Korea was able to receive more food supply from China, but their basic direction is to lower its reliance on China. So they are trying to prop up their economy on their own. So they were probably trying to come up with the supply from inside the country instead of relying on China so much. So as I have mentioned earlier, Kim Jong-un is the most active in preparing against natural disasters, because that would make a big contribution to agricultural development. And then also to improve people's livelihood. And one of the economic policies for that is to energize local economy and also to build what they call the new rural societies. And they have also been making preparation to that end on a gradual and step-by-step basis. Then also looking at some of the industrial areas, now some of the goals and the targets presented for the industrial activities. Now, many of them are not for the short term. So now at this time, some say that at this part of Congress, the industrial activity presentation was not made. So some say that perhaps North Korea had no achievements on that front, but I do not agree with that assessment, because regarding the industrial achievements, this is an area where we have to wait and see. So in some, now at this part of Congress, they highlighted only the short-term outcome, especially targeted for improving people's livelihood. Now, next is about this year's projects and plan. And yes, there was a detailed explanation about the projects planned for each sector. And again, most of them are related to improving people's livelihood. So the people's livelihood, it comes down to food, clothing, and housing. So they have also been proposed as the major projects. Now, one thing interesting is about the flour. So there was an instruction to increase wheat production. And rather than being a new policy, now, of course, people's diet has changed quite a lot. They don't eat only rice or corn, but they also consume a lot of processed flour, and that is also diversifying their dietary culture. And this is also uh, representing the improvement in people's livelihood. So I believe that this is one area that is likely to strengthen. And another development of note is about the new agricultural development plans. I would say that this is the blueprint, a new blueprint for the uh, non-capital regions. And yes, as was mentioned earlier about improving and changing 개변. So I would say that the 개변, the term improvement and changing, now this comes up the most often in relation to the rural society. So now they have come up with the direction to improve and change the rural society. So having said that, then for 2022, I believe the areas of focus are as such. Now, on one hand, North Korea is, of course, now they are projecting very uncertain and fluid circumstances, but at the same time, they are maintaining their self-reliance path. And at the same time, they are trying to build new rural society, and also their ambition of resolving their food problem in the next 10 years. Now they represent very ambitious plans and target. Of course, today they still suffer from COVID-19. So even against this uncertain and fluid circumstances, they have come up with very high and ambitious goals. So I believe that that is something that we have to take note of. And also North Korea now currently now in this lockdown, they are utilizing this period as the time to build up the type of infrastructure or the basis for the next phase of development. So I think that is very important. Then also the 110th year anniversary and the 80th anniversary or the birthday of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-un. I believe that this also coincides with their targets and goals. Anyways, I believe that for North Korea right now, the highest priority is to improve on people's livelihood, so food, clothing, and housing, as we call it, so for the bare necessities, and also their construction. So I believe that they also have the same focus on construction as well. So there is also going to be a construction boom in North Korea. But now, what is important is that this is a state-led self-reliance direction. And what is important here is to come up with the necessary financial resources or the funding. So this also means that they have to increase production and they need to have more better functioning co-ops. And also the market function has to be more brisk. But then that is not clear yet. So I would say that these remain important topics of research for us. So building up new rural society and resolving food problems for the next 10 years and to pursue them in the way that would reduce reliance on China. So given this, then, even the COVID-19 situation were to be resolved, I believe that trade with China is probably not going to increase as much as it used to in the past, but then they are probably going to remain more focused on the bare necessities. So North Korea is now in the third year of its border closure. So more than any time before, North Korea, in order to maintain its domestic economy under the border closure, then they also need to have some institutional changes as well as legal changes. So I believe that it is also a very important period for us to observe their, let's say, the regime durability. Right, thank you very much. So that was Professor Imul Chul, who has given us a broad assessment of the North Korean economy as well as the evaluation. Thank you very much.
The economic situation has been widely reported, and because we're out of time, I would like to ask Dr. Yang to just keep to those points that have not been mentioned, just things that you just want to emphasize very briefly. Maybe just 7 minutes, please. Thank you. Dr. Lim has given us a comprehensive assessment of the DPRK economy, and I agree with most of what he said, but I just want to stress some things in particular. Last year, I believe that the DPRK economy, according to what the DPRK has said, they have said that it was a year of great victory, but of course, I don't agree with this kind of assessment. Last year, the DPRK's economy was not very successful. I don't think that it was very terrible, but the DPRK talks about agriculture and construction. I do admit that the agricultural achievements have been quite high, but with construction, it was really mostly residential construction that the DPRK has done, but they have not been mentioning any achievements in non-residential construction or civil engineering. And with machinery or coal, chemistry, metal, commerce and tourism. These were industries that have not been mentioned by the DPRK at all. So I think there's a very big disconnect between the industries that the DPRK mentioned and the industries that they did not. And if the industries have not been mentioned by the DPRK, such as metal, chemistry, light industry, commerce, and tourism, we believe that they have seen a huge stagnant, very huge downturn in terms of the industries, in particular with metal and chemical industries. They have been actually stressing the importance of these industries at the 8th Party Congress, but we have not been able to see this at the plenary. And the same thing with the light industry or commerce. In fact, there has been no mention of commerce in the last plenary. And for commerce in particular, I think that it has been really heavily impacted by COVID-19. If we look at 2020, for those areas that are classified as other services, they've seen a downturn of about 10%. For the economic growth rate, I know that the BOK is going to make an announcement in June of this year, but it was minus 4.5% in 2020. And I think that last year, I think it's going to be minus 1% or about 0%. So it's going to be a little bit better than 2020, but I still think that they're going to be negative territory. And if that is the case, from 2017 to 18, 19, 20, 21, so this basically means that for those years where they've seen zero growth, for about 5 years, they've actually been on a downturn, on a downhill climb. For this year, I think that Dr. Kim has been very specific in his presentation. So I just want to say that the 5-year economic development plan was proposed at the 8th Party Congress, but now we are in the 2nd year of this 5-year plan. But I think that there's been a bit of a change. There haven't been any massive changes, but I think there's a bit of a small changes. So for example, with the 5-year economic development plan, DPRK has said that it's going to focus on metals and chemicals in the past, but I think there is less emphasis on metals and chemicals, and instead DPRK has emphasized agriculture as the foremost industry that they're going to focus on. This is primarily because metal and chemical industries are primarily components industries, and so because of sanctions, COVID-19, because they were unable to source the relative materials, they were not able to get the materials that they need to develop the metal and chemical industries. Well, there was no mention of metal or chemical industries this plenary. However, with agriculture industry, as you know, it is tied in with food production, which are consumables, consumer goods. And so, because we know that commerce and light industry have been heavily impacted by the COVID and by different situations in DPRK, the DPRK wants to try to, because they find it difficult to source materials from abroad, they're going to try to use the materials and the ingredients they have domestically to try to be more realistic and pragmatic in the industries that they're going to foster. That is why they are focusing on agriculture. So I think this will come down to the kind of incentives that they're going to provide to the farmers with the thought and ideology, because that is really resting with agriculture. I think that is why the DPRK is focusing more on the rural economy and agriculture. With priorities and means and objectives, we've seen slight changes. Last year, we've seen how the DPRK, how Kim Jong-un would really scold and discipline the elites and the officers, but I think we were seeing less of that in the plenary because many people are very exhausted. So I think that the leader is trying to be more embracing of the failures. This means that they are trying to be preparing for a longer struggle, an ultra long kind of struggle going forward. For agriculture, there are many different things that are being mentioned, but I think that the fact that the DPRK is bringing back the revival of the CSIS argument from 1964 is quite striking, that the DPRK is trying to have a strong state leadership and decent kind of ownership of the people. I don't know if this is going to be very strong because for the state support aspect, even when Kim Jong-un's early years, when the economy is doing a little bit better, they were not able to provide a high level of state support. So now that the economy is flailing, I don't think that they're going to be able to provide the level of state support that they want. However, I think for South Hwanghae province, Hwanghae-Namdo, because Kim Jong-un specifically emphasized that province, I think there might be some support given there, but for that country, for the country's breadbasket. But I think that perhaps this year, it'll be similar as last year because of COVID-19. COVID-19 is going to continue to be the biggest variable. And if it's going to take some time to overcome COVID-19, I think that this year is going to be very difficult as well. But it doesn't appear to be strikingly that case if we look at the indicators, because they're typically lagging. And the DPRK has already been through a terrible situation over the last 5 years. So it's difficult to see with the lagging indicators, but I think that the deepening, worsening situation for the residents, for the people of the DPRK is going to continue. Thank you very much. Dr. Yang has talked about many different things, but for the 8th Party Congress, he said that the economic development plan, that perhaps it has been shifted slightly. For example, with metals and chemicals, they were emphasized before, but in the process of settling the accounts for about a year, it appears that the role of metals and chemicals have been downsized. And so there's some changes made to the means and the objectives of the economic development plan because they're preparing for a longer struggle. And also with agriculture, there was some mention of that in the plenary. agriculture was really front and center. For a DPRK leader to talk about the deep agriculture sector as the foremost a priority sector, and even talking about a possible long-term plan for the next 10 years was the first time for this to happen. So now we'd like to hear from Professor Zhang,
뭐 이런 거 연구를 많이 하고 또
because I know that she is really focusing on this kind of studies and analysis at Jilin University. So Professor Zhang Hui is going to talk about the areas of rural economy and agriculture.
Thank you very much. Once again, thank you for the invitation. Now, as I was listening attentively to Professor Lee Mul-chul and Professor Yang Mun-su's discussion. Now, yes, at the fourth plenary, now, see that I was a bit now, as was expected by the South Korean scholars as well, they would have or should have discussed the, let's say, all the different policies, political or security. But then I was surprised because they had focused quite a lot on the economic issues. And also, when they were discussing the economic matters, they had listed the issues in the for the key industries like the metal or the different key industries. But not only that, they also focused on some of the key issues of the other areas of the nation. So, for example, the healthcare, education, and so forth. So then the Korean scholars so far have wondered whether North Korea is still intent on self-reliance or not. But what I see is that North Korea has never abandoned its path of self-reliance, and probably they will focus on this even more because they are trying to rely less on the outside. So what I sense is that they will actually be even more focused on this direction. But then at this plenary, the word itself was not mentioned, but then they into went more into the specifics about how to achieve that. So in North Korea, it appears as if they are now highlighting more of the practical aspects of economic development. So not just the capital region, but then also the different provinces, and also the counties and cities, and also not even that, but also from the different local levels. They say that the leaders of the different regional levels have also participated in the plenary. So this means that the party officials' message was directly communicated to them and with emphasis that this is the direction that must be followed. So it appears as if North Korea is emphasizing more on the practical aspects, and that also means that there is a higher likelihood of the policies being implemented. And also, Kim Jong-un has made a report on the socialist rural development, and now some of the Korean scholars have called this the North Korean New Village Movement. But then in China, we call this the three Nong issue. So that is the agricultural society, people, and the industry. And also, when we look at the report, then the report is entitled The Historic Report with Major Transformation Significance on Socialist Rural Development by Kim Jong-un. And I do not believe that the historic report is an expression that is commonly used in North Korea. And now this is probably for the first time after Kim Il-sung declared his topic. This is probably the first in North Korea that the leader has announced such a plan for the rural development. And it also offers revolutionary changes in the rural society and also highlights the specific ways of implementing improvement in food supply and the livelihood in the agricultural area, and also at the same time improving the thought level of the agricultural workers and to have breakthrough development in the agricultural productivity and to have fundamental improvement and change in the rural life. So then for the agricultural workers, or what we call the farmers, so what I call the three nong, so the agricultural people and society and industry. So the same that we can see. And now in the case of China, they have been focused on this three known issue for quite a long time and has yet to be resolved. And I believe that in North Korea, they are struggling under COVID-19 and the economic sanctions are still on them. So then without getting any outside help, how is North Korea going to improve? How are they going to find ways to improve their people's livelihood? And perhaps they are now seeing agriculture as the first solution to this. So because I see that for agriculture production, this is an area where they can make improvement without outside help. And of course, so far they have been focused on light industries as well. And until COVID-19, so we had visited Pyongyang every year and also to Naju region. But then we see that North Korean light industries has improved quite a lot. And then along with that, if they can also increase their agricultural production, then I believe that North Korea probably believes that they will be able to at least maintain people's livelihood at the current standard. Then also the Korean scholars appear to have differing views about the outcome of North Korea's economic development last year. And of course, we are wondering about that too. And so in China, we are also wondering about the exact outcome of North Korean economic development last year. But then I believe that the overall assessment is that, especially for agriculture and construction, they have probably normalized at a much faster rate than expected. And of course, there are no specific numbers coming out of North Korea regarding that. So it is not an exact or accurate picture, but under such a severe difficulties last year, Now, if they were able to make some improvement in the food supply, so in the provision of the basic necessities, then that itself would be a big achievement. And North Korea regime probably also had believed that we will prevail if we can make improvement in the supply of basic necessities. So Kim Jong-un's speech also included such words as a year of great triumph, and some of the other content of the speech also point to the possibility that North Korea was able to make economic improvement at a much faster pace than others had expected. And also, on the other hand, yes, along with the assessment, they also need to show a positive attitude in order to maintain the momentum for the 5-year plan. And of course, this year is the 110th anniversary and the 80th anniversary of Kim Il Sung and Kim Jong Il. So they would of course, having the ceremonies this year. And this year is also the first year of the second decade of Kim Jong Un's rule. So he needs to exude this kind of confidence to continue to pursue the goals for this year. Is probably what he had believed. And in order to address the food supply issue without relying on the outside, and I have the sense that their food situation is probably not as worse as the outside world thinks. Because now last year there were a lot of meetings about Kim Jong Un's decade in power, and now perhaps because of the COVID-19 and also because of the economic sanctions, the food supply in North Korea is probably in dire situation was the assessment by many scholars in South Korea. But then, based on the views and the discussions that I have exchanged with the North Koreans, what I get is that it's actually quite okay. And at least the food situation is almost back to normal. And that they were saying that even without getting outside help, they are able to address this on their own. So I believe that this will remain their focus. In other words, they will try to improve the rural society. Then again, this is going to be, so it has to be a long-term agenda for them to be able to fundamentally solve the food production issue. Another issue or another comment that I would like to make is now the reason why North Korea focuses so much on food production is that now since COVID-19, all the countries in the world are focusing more on food security. An increasing number of countries are now prohibiting food export. And perhaps it is due to this change in the circumstance that North Korea has also realized that they have to rely on themselves for food production. So even if they were to get support from the outside, it is not going to be much. So it is because, perhaps because of that. So they are probably trying to utilize the different agricultural techniques in order to increase the food production as well as the agricultural efficiency. So from that perspective, then now coming into the year 2022,
북한의 그 변경 시관을 아마 혹시라도 개방할 것이라고 판단을 했지만 근데
so some had projected that North Korea would probably reopen the border area with China. But then the news that North Korea will not be attending the Beijing Olympics, and then also for the COVID-19, that because of Omicron variant, the COVID pandemic is actually getting worse. Given that, North Korea reopening its borders will take probably longer than expected. So then, at the fourth plenary, so they were highlighting the economic development with particular focus on food production was probably inevitable because of the given environment. So that is all. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for the discussion. So Professor Zhang especially talked about the agricultural development plan. And as was mentioned by Professors Lim and Yang, North Korea now, because of the COVID-19 and also because of the long drawn out economic sanctions, North Korea is now trying to prepare against them with a long term strategy, with especially a focus on food supply, in other words, agriculture. And Professor Chang also talked about how in this COVID-19 era, different countries in the world are now paying more attention to food security. So now, given this, then also given the fact that the outside aid is going to be limited, and given that feeding the people would be the most important thing, North Korea is probably focusing more on agricultural development given the circumstances. And also based on such development, then the Kim Jong-un's discourse on putting or having people first. So perhaps that would also be one way of implementing such principle. So thank you very much for that. And yes, we've gone much over time, but with that, we would conclude the discussion on the political, military, and the economic development of North Korea. And we will take a short break to be followed by the assessment of North Korean foreign policy strategy. So it will be presented by Professor Sun Bong-gun with discussants Professor Lee Jung-chul and Park Won-gun. And then there will be a session on North Korea's policy towards the South with presenter Yang Moon-jin and discussants Choi Yong-hwan and Jung Ji-yong. And after that, so we will have a 10-minute break and we'll continue with the following sessions. Thank you.